In this session, I will walk you through the capabilities of Apromore Enterprise Edition. When you enter into Apromore, you get into a workspace that is organized into folders and files, and you can move around these files and organize them in the way you wish. Files can be of two types. There can be process models in the BPMN notation, and this can be automatically discovered process models or process models that you have manually designed or a mixture of both. And then you have event logs, which are data sets that you import either manually or automatically from an enterprise system. I will start by showing you a manual upload of a data set from a comma-separated value files. For that, I point Apromore to the comma-separated value files with my dataset. And Apromore then tries to recognize as much as it can the types of columns in your dataset. Here it has recognized that the first column is a case ID, the second column corresponds to the activity that is being performed, the third column corresponds to the human resource who performs this activity or the machine who performs this activity. And there is a start timestamp and an end timestamp that have been automatically recognized. Everything else by default is treated as another attribute, could be an event attribute or a case attribute. Once I have imported an event log into Apromore, I can analyze it using a variety of plugins. The main plugin in Apromore is the so-called Process Discoverer. When I double click on a file, by default, it will open the Process Discoverer. Here I have opened an event log of a manufacturing process, a process in which every case represents a batch that goes through a production line. There are, and I can see here in the log statistics, there are 225 cases in this event log. And there are in total about 9,100 events, which means instances of activities performed in the context of these cases. There are in total 55 different types of activities in this process, and the process has a lot of variability. Almost every one of the 225 cases follows a different pathway, which we also call a case variant. As a result of this, because this process is very complex and every case is kind of unique and goes through a different pathway, if I try to visualize it in its entirety, I will be unable to understand it. By default, Apromore will not show you the entire process, but only an abstracted version of it, where a certain number of arcs have been deleted. In the middle of the process discovery, you have the abstraction settings that allows you to determine what percentage of the arcs in this process will be displayed in the process discoverer. By default, this is set to 10%, but I can push it to any percentage I want. If I push it too high, like to 100%, I will get a complete spaghetti model because, as I mentioned before, this process has so many different pathways that you can virtually go from any activity to any other activity. So it has too many control flow dependencies. So I can adjust using the abstraction sliders the percentage of arcs that are being displayed. By default, Apromore will only display the most frequent arcs, meaning when I move the arc slider from right to left, I am removing the less frequent arcs. I can also display some of the nodes, not all the nodes, but just 50% of the nodes. This is very useful in case you have some activities that are being performed very rarely. You can perform abstraction in many different ways. Like, for example, I can click on these invert ordering arrows, and what has happened now is that instead of Apromore displaying me the most frequent control flow dependencies, it starts displaying me the opposite, the most infrequent control flow dependencies. And that can be very useful. For example, when I want to find anomalies in my process, some cases that, take some pathways that are very rare that no other cases will take. Or I can abstract by average duration, in which case, when I move the sliders down, I will be removing either the slowest path or the fastest path. The abstraction settings allow me to determine what level of abstraction I want to see. In this case, I'm seeing a subset of the activity and a subset of the arcs. I can then start determining what information do I put on top of every activity and on top of every arc. By default in Apromore, in the process map view, which is the one where I am, every activity has associated to it the number of cases in which this activity occurs. So here, this activity occurs only once, in one case, whereas this activity occurs in 35 cases and this one in 39 cases. I can also, in the arcs, Apromore by default will display the case frequency, which tells me that in one case, I saw turning machine 5 followed by turning and milling machine 5. In 3 cases, I saw setup, the turning machine number 5. From there, I moved to turning and milling machine 5, and so on. So let me here display you all the activities, and let me select a suitable level of abstraction, such as in this case, 10%, 12%. So now I can start displaying other types of statistics on top of each activity or on top of every arc. I can display the relative case frequency, which tells me in what percentage of cases, for example, I saw milling machine 8, or in what percentage of cases after seeing machine 8, I saw turning and milling machine QC. I can display other statistics here. Like, for example, I can display, instead of the relative case frequency, the total case frequency. In this case, in every node, I see how many times this activity was executed across all 225 cases, counting even situations where this activity was performed twice in a case. I could also display the maximum number of times that every activity occurred in a given case. So here there was a case where grinding reward machine number 27 occurred 20 times, which means that this activity may be repeated quite a few times inside the same case of the process. I can switch also, in addition to manipulating frequency views, I can overlay on top of the process map a duration, for example, the average duration of every task, or the waiting time between the moment a task completed and the task and the next task started. In this case, for example, 60 minutes is the average time between the moment turning machine 21 finishes and the moment turning machine 8 starts. And this view allows me to find the bottlenecks in the process, which I will see with a darker color. Like, for example, here I can see that this is one of the activities that takes the most time, 8 hours on average. I can also see that there is an arc here that takes a very high amount of time. It takes about 2.8 weeks between the moment packing finishes and the moment fixed machine number 15 finishes. It might be, however, that this takes 2.8 weeks on average, but it doesn't happen very often, that this dependency happens infrequently. I can take the dual view to see both statistics, the average duration, 2.8 weeks, and the number of times where this occurs, which is once. So yes, between packing and fixed machine 5, one has to wait 2.8 weeks, but this relation only happened once, which means it's a very infrequent bottleneck. There might be other more frequent bottlenecks, which we can expect by navigating through this process map with a dual overlay. We can also select other duration statistics like the median duration between two activities, the total duration cumulative across all cases, the maximum duration between two activities, or the minimum duration between any two given activities. At any point in time and in any of these overlays, I can switch, if I so wish, between this process map view, which is showing me tasks and directly follows dependencies between tasks, and the BPMN view. In the BPMN view, in addition to seeing tasks and dependencies, I can also see gateways. And those gateways tell me, for example, what are the decision points in the process. And if I put myself in the relative case view, I can see not only the decision points, but I can see also the percentage of times that I take each of the branches in this decision point. I can also very clearly see repetitions, like for example here I can see a turning and milling machine followed by setup machine 4 being repeated a certain number of times before I exit. And if this process had parallelism, I could also see parallel gateways. As it turns out, this is a manufacturing process where nothing really occurs in parallel. Things are quite sequential. However, if I took another type of process, like for example, a healthcare process where several things tend to happen in parallel, here I have one such example, then I will be able to, in addition to sequences, see parallelism. For example, here in this process, I can see activities such as emergency room registration, emergency room triage, and a few types of treatments and laboratory tests like CRP, leukocytes, IV liquid. I can see that this process looks quite messy. I wouldn't be able to know in the process map what is happening between these activities I am showing here. Are they being repeated? Are they being executed in parallel? Are there any decision points? By switching to the BPMN view, I can see all that. I can see that, for example, here, there was a decision point. Here, there was a parallel branching point. On the one hand, I had CRP being repeated in a loop a number of times. On the other hand, I have leukocytes being repeated also a number of times. And after CRP, I have a release of the patient, which can be of type B, of type D, of type C, of type E, depending on the type of diagnosis that we have made for that patient. So, and this is this gives me the power to distinguish between decision points, parallel branching points in my process, and repetition, and this is very unique to Apromore. In addition to being able to see process maps and process models from the perspective, both in terms of a process map or in a BPMN notation, I can also see other views in the process discoverer. For example, here I am seeing activities in my process and relationship between activities. But I could, for example, switch to other perspectives. Any column in the log that I imported to Apromore can be used as a perspective. One of the columns in this log is the worker ID. If I switch to that perspective, then the nodes that I'm displaying are no longer activities, but they are workers inside this factory. And then I can see how workers in the map, I can see how workers are handing off work to others. For example, worker number 4429 here is handing off work to worker 4932, who is then handing off the production batch to worker 4529, who is then handing it off back to 4429. And I can see how workers are moving things across them, both with a frequency overlay or, if I so wish, with a duration overlay. When I see things with a duration overlay, I can see which workers take, on average, the largest amount of time to perform this activity, or conversely, the fastest amount of time to perform their activity, which workers are bottlenecks and you need to wait very long for them to pick up a task, and which task workers have a smaller type of waiting time. Let me go back to the activities view and show you some other of the capabilities of Apromore. In here, I am visualizing the entire process, but I can select any subset of the cases or the events in the process for visualization. For that, I'm going to apply filters. Apromore offers a very wide range of filters, both filters that remove or retain cases, entire cases, or filters that remove or retain specific event types. I'm going to focus on the case filters in this walkthrough. In the case filters, I can, for example, retain only those cases where a certain activity occurs. For example, here there is an activity called grinding rework, and I might be interested in seeing what leads to me having to redo this grinding. So I select that activity and I'm saying, let me retain only those cases where grinding rework occurs. I can see here that this happens in 7 cases only. I apply this filter and I can then, when I say OK, I can then see only those 7 cases where grinding rework occurs. This is kind of sufficiently simple so that I can see the whole process with all its complexity, because there are only 7 cases. I can even go, and because it's such a small number of cases, and start inspecting them one by one. So for example, here I can see, for example, case number 41, and I can see exactly what sequence of activities happen in case number 41, in case number 112, which seems to be a much more complicated case with a longer pathway, or in case 271, which is an even more complicated case with a lot of repetition around machine number 1, as we can see in this diagram. I can also filter along a variety of other criteria. For example, I can filter by case variant and only retain the most frequent variants, or I can filter specific cases if I want to see some specific cases of interest, or I can filter by time frame and retain, for example, only those cases that happen in March, or only the cases that happen in February of this year, or in January of this year, or only the cases of last year and not the cases of this year. I can also filter by performance. I can retain only those cases where, for example, the case duration was more than 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks, or those cases where the case duration was more than 2 weeks. And I have a range of statistics I can pick in these performance measures that I can use to define in this performance filter. I can also filter by pairs of activities that happen in the process. For example, give me only those cases where I had a final inspection and later I had laser marking. That should normally not happen. I can also put constraints. For example, these 2 activities that I selected should occur within a span of 2 hours, otherwise don't show them to me. Or I can express 4 eyes principle, like for example, give me those cases where this activity and that activity were performed by the same resource or by different resources. When I apply this filter, I will only be seeing those cases that fulfill all the criteria that I have defined. And finally, I have rework and repetition filters that allow me to extract or to remove those cases where, for example, a given activity was repeated, let's say, more than 5 times, which are very problematic cases. In this way, we can then start comparing, on the one hand, processes that are slow, take, let's say, less than 4 days, processes that are not slow. Every time I filter a log, I can visualize it as much as I want at any level of abstraction, and I can save, if I put it in BPMN format, I can save the BPMN model, or I can save the filter log, and I can say, for example, this thing I'm displaying you are the slow cases, and I apply the filter to retain only the fast cases. Every time I save a filter log, it goes into the portal. So in the portal, I can now see that I have from this process the slow cases and the fast cases separately. And I can see here my process model that captures all the cases together. And I can do a certain number of things using these artifacts. For example, I can take the event log filter to only contain the fast cases and the one that contains the slower cases. And I can open another plugin, Apromore, called the Performance Dashboard. And this is going, because I selected 2 event logs, Apromore is going to be displaying me 2 different statistics for both sublogs. In blue, I am seeing the cases that are fast, and in red, I am seeing the cases that are slow. And Apromore in the dashboard displays different views the overview view, the activities view, and the resources view. In the overview view, I see some general statistics about the log. First, at the top, some performance indicators, such as the case duration, which on average is 1.45 weeks for the slow cases and 1.61 for the fast cases, sorry, and 1.61 months for the slow cases. I can then see a number of charts like the events over time, the active cases over time, and I can see here, for example, the slow cases peaking. I can put this in relative scale or in absolute scales, whatever I prefer. I can see here the distribution of case variance or the case utilization, what percentage of time in a case is spent actually doing some work versus how much time is spent in waiting times. I can see here details about the specific, every specific case with its corresponding statistics and so on for the slow cases, or I can switch to the fast cases if I so wish. In the activities view, I can see statistics about activities like the average duration for slow cases versus fast cases, the distribution of occurrences or frequencies of different activities. So I can see immediately, for example, that packing occurs in relative terms slower in the fast cases than in the slow cases, which is counterintuitive. But on the other hand, machine number 3 takes a lot more time in the slow cases than in the fast cases, which then gives me a hint as to why certain cases are taking longer than others. And in the resources perspective, I can see the distribution of the resources that appear in the fast cases versus the slow cases, and I can start comparing them, and finding some patterns that can tell me why are some cases going slower than others. Everything that you're seeing in this dashboard can be fully customized. So if I can enter into the edit mode in this dashboard, and I can take any of the charts in here and I can customize what is being displayed. Maybe instead of displaying the events over time, I might be interested in displaying the average processing time or the average waiting time. And this is automatically updated. I can say I want to use a relative scale instead of an absolute scales. I can choose among a number of different types of charts. I can use line charts, I can use bar charts, I can use polar splice charts, etc. of different types. In the advanced mode, I can even do advanced operation like slicing a log into sublogs and displaying the sublogs as the statistics of the sublogs at different data series. Or I can apply the filtering, the same filtering that I showed you before. I can apply directly from my dashboard and filter the log only for one of these charts and not for the others if I so wish. Any change that I do in these charts is going to be saved. I can also add additional tabs into this visualization, and I can then, every time I share the log with one of my colleagues, my colleague is able to see the dashboards that I have been designed. And if they have the access rights, they can also themselves add their own charts on top of these event logs. By now, I have shown you some of the capabilities of the Process Discoverer plugin in Apromore and of the Performance Dashboard in Apromore. Another capability of Apromore is what we call log animation. Log animation means that you can take an automatically discovered process model, like this one that has been discovered automatically. So to show you how it looks like, I'm going to open it because Apromore has a BPMN process model editor that allows me to open either an automatically discovered process model or a manually designed one. And I can even start editing these process models and making it look better. So let me take, for example, this manufacturing process, which is a relatively complex process, and let me take the fast cases and the slow cases. I select the model and the two sublogs, and I can now run an animation of these event logs against the process model that I have automatically discovered. And this animation is going to show me at a certain pace how the different production batches are circulating through my process models. And I can find patterns like there are more blues going here above, which means blue means fast cases. So the machines here at the top seems to be faster than the machines here at the bottom, because I see more slow or red cases going to the bottom. I could see some bottlenecks, like here in nitration QC, I see tokens going a little bit slower, or in churning and milling QC here, I can see that tokens are circulating slower, which means there is a bit of a bottleneck buildup in there. I can control the speed of the animation, make it slower or make it faster, depending on how it goes. And I can even show in case identifiers for every token that is circulating here. So I see here case 78 circulating through this particular process. And with that, I have concluded my short walkthrough around the capabilities of Apromore. I have only shown you maybe half of the capabilities of Apromore. There is much more to be discovered. There is many more capabilities that we provide in Apromore, and our capabilities are constantly evolving. So I invite you to visit us at apromore.org if you want to get further information.